focus to walkthroughs, because walkthroughs is that next little piece, and it's really not all that hard to do, but there's kind of some funny nuance to it. So we're going to go through and just kind of make sure you don't fall into the little holes as you go through and try and create these things. Okay, it all starts with this notion of really specifying a path. So you're just going to go ahead and indicate points along a path, and what's going to happen is Revit will create a spline curve that connects all those different points, and that path is really the path that the camera is going to move around on. So as we get started with that, I always go to a floor plan view. I think you have to go to a floor plan view to make this work. Let me zoom out. And I'll even just turn that to a hidden line view so we don't have too much confusion about all the different line types. I'll say 3D view, and we'll use walkthrough. That's the kind of, the forgotten cousin of the others. We have the choice of whether it'll have perspective or just be orthogonal or orthographic. We'll choose the offset. The offset right now is currently set to 5'6" above the floor level. We're going to go back and play with that a little bit later, but once you set the height of the camera, that's locked. Okay, the camera is set once, and you can't really move the height after it's already been set. Okay. So what I'm going to do, the path I defined last time was I sort of start out here outside the building. I sort of came to the point where I would want the curve to bend. That's second point, a third point, kind of a fourth point, and here's my fifth point. So go through and just place some points, and each of those different points are keyframes. They're special locations along the path, and really what you're doing more than anything is just sort of indicating where that path should wind. Okay, we'll go back and adjust that path in a second, but for right now, just get a path laid down, and 4 or 5 points, maybe even 6 points is fine. Because by default, what you're going to have is you're going to have 300 frames of video. I'll show you how to change that. By default, it's set up to be, 20 frames per second? No, it's 15 frames a second. So it gives you 20 seconds of video. And again, we can sort of change that depending upon how jumpy or how smooth you want the video to be. But the trade-off is, as you go through and you try and place more and more frames, that's more data to compute, so it's going to take longer if you render it or if you go through and actually create a movie. But we'll start by just creating those. I'll say finish the walkthrough. Okay, you have the path right there. Let me edit the walkthrough. Oh, what do I want to do? I should have actually switched to the other view. The walkthrough shows up down here in the list of things in the project browser. I can rename that. Let me go ahead and rename that before I go much further. I'll say, how about that is the tour through the front door? The front lobby. How about that? Okay. Open that up. Let me click on the frame of the walkthrough. Now I can say edit it. And what happens is we get this little control which shows how many frames are in the movie and which frame we're looking at. Right now we're looking at frame 300, okay, the very last frame. If you want to, the quickest way to get back to the beginning is just say 1. Okay, and it'll take you back out to the very first frame. Okay. So as you're looking at this frame, there are a couple things you might want to do to start with. It all starts with just taking a look at that walkthrough view and adjusting its cropping, its zoom, or maybe the combination of the two together. Okay, so let's take a look at what that's like. So again, I opened the walkthrough in the project browser, and I said edit the walkthrough. I got this window, and what I can do now is I can adjust the crop boundary if I like. If you're adjusting the crop boundary, what you're really actually doing is sort of changing the lens on the camera to be sort of a more narrowly focused telephoto lens to a wide-angle lens. Okay? You can also go through and adjust the zoom. Now, I'm not very good at explaining what the zoom does in this sense from a camera standpoint. It's almost like, maybe it's like zoom on a camera, telephotoing out or kind of zooming in from the same camera location, but just actually sort of, zooming in much closer on whatever the image is. Okay, so I don't mess around with that one very much. There is a combination, because those two things really sort of work together, that they call size crop. And let's take a look at that. That is right now, this frame has a size, And if I decide to change its size, I could either change the field of view or the scale, okay? And you sort of get a trade-off there. And that's exactly what we were doing with the crop. If I change the field of view, what I'm doing is I'm basically resizing the frame. So the same zoom is maintained, but the frame gets bigger or the frame gets smaller. Okay, that's the same as what I call changing the crop region. Okay, scale is given the same window size, scale it up or scale it down. And that's more like zooming. Or even as we go through and change the size, kind of changing what the picture gets bigger, but the scale, it's rescaled as opposed to encompassing more area. So let's kind of show you what the effect of those two things. Field of view, for example, if I said change the height to 5 inches, what I expect it to do is actually, it's going to just raise the top and bottom boundaries to change the crop. Let me go back to 4. If I say field of view, it'll just compress it, but the view doesn't, the image doesn't actually change. It's just the framing changes. Scaling does this. If I make that 5, it'll take the same amount of data and just sort of spread it around. It'll zoom it in. Okay. So again, if I make it 6 inches, it'll have the effect of scaling it, which is like zooming it in. Did it do it? Oh, it's doing it in, it's proportional, and it's keeping it zoomed in, I see. You can't see the difference, but that's only because it's zoomed up to that level. It's changing the size of the window. Okay. Once you get the window set up the way you like it, the next step is typically to go through and just adjust the camera target. So if this is the frame we want to be looking through, we now get to go through and for each of the different keyframes say what it is we're choosing to look at. So we'll choose it. I'll say edit the walkthrough, and at frame 1, I can say, let me go ahead and look a little further over here. I can then say, let's go to the next keyframe. And again, I will just sort of adjust, what am I looking at? I just keep on changing the target. So for every point in time, it's sort of choosing, or every point along the path, it's choosing what it thinks I'm looking at based on the way the path is curving. But I can reset it and say I would rather look over here instead. Okay. And what it'll do is between all the keyframes, not only will it translate me, will it move me between here and here, but it'll switch me from looking here to over here gradually. So it'll be ever so slowly kind of doing this sort of thing. Okay, so you're basically transitioning both ways. You're transitioning both position. You're also transitioning where the target is. Okay, next keyframe. We'll change what it's looking at. Next keyframe. Again, we'll sort of change what it's looking at. And finally, at the end, what we're looking at. Maybe for that one, I'll be looking up. So I can go back all the way to the previous frame. I can sort of navigate this one frame at a time. I could jump by keyframe, or I could just say plane. And all I'm really doing now is sort of paying attention to what my camera's looking at in each of the different views. Okay. So your first big thing is place the cameras. Second thing is adjust the frame of the camera and just what the camera is looking at in each of the different keyframes. What's happening here is as I start going through the door, I've already started not only moving, but I'm sort of doing the rotation, okay, for looking down the hall at the same time. And that may not feel very natural. You know, it's sort of accurate, but it's not really very natural feeling in terms of what's going on. We probably actually wouldn't start making that corner until we got inside the place. So this is a case where our path needs a little bit of adjustment. We might need another keyframe somewhere between the start and being inside the building, just so that we can sort of start making that transition a little more naturally. And let me show you what that would look like. That gets to this issue of really just adjusting the path. Let me cancel that and we'll get back out. Okay, so we have this, we have the walkthrough. If I'd like to see the path and start adjusting that, what I need to do is as follows. I can open up a floor plan view. And then if you can't see the walkthrough right now, you can choose the walkthrough. Let me right-click on it, and I'll say show the camera, and it'll actually show me the path, so I can choose it. Then I can say edit it. And let's take a look at what you can edit in this window. Okay, here's the path. Each of those little red dots is a keyframe right now. Okay, you'll see by the time I get to the front door, I'm already sort of swung over there pretty far. Okay, so that's probably not exactly what I want to have in mind. So I can change active cameras. Active cameras really do the same thing that we were doing with the keyframes. At every active camera, I could go through and sort of change its target position. And if you prefer to do that in a floor plan view, feel free to. That's just another way of doing it. I can go to the next keyframe, take a look at that camera, and I can again change its target position. Okay. Let me go bopping on back to the beginning. But rather than just sort of changing the camera, let's think about actually changing the path. The path is actually where these little red dots are, where the keyframes are, and we can either sort of move those existing dots around, we can add new ones or remove ones, just as necessary. Okay, so let's think about what we may want to do. Oh, let's go ahead and just start adjusting the path. The path is really just this notion that we can start moving the curve. So if you grab one of the red dots and start moving them, okay, you're just changing the locations of where those keyframes are. Okay, in my case, what I wanted to do is actually sort of move back here a little bit, so I have a keyframe before the door. Okay. Then what I'm actually going to do is actually add another keyframe after the door. So the one before the door will still be looking at the door head on. After the door, it will start swinging around. Okay, so I can move the path around. I can also do this thing called adding keyframes. Adding keyframes, if you hover over the line, lets you go through and place another dot. Okay, so I've added one right there. You can add as many as you want. Don't add too many. Okay, you want to add just as many as you need to sort of control your view as you're popping around. You can add them sort of anywhere along the path. Okay, you can't add them past the end or before the beginning, though. Okay, and let's talk about how you get around that. There's always ways to get around these things. Okay, if I want to sort of extend that path, if I want to say that I don't really want it to end here, I would really like it to come back into the lab space. Okay, what I'd love to do is actually add another key point out here, but it won't let me do that. So what could I do? One strategy is to take the path and grab the last one and pull it out here. Okay, then we can add a keyframe in, somewhere back in here, and then sort of move that path. Okay, so you can add, you may need to sort of move the beginning or the end out a little bit to accomplish what you want, okay, but add points in as necessary. After you've added those points in, you probably want to go through and adjust what you're looking at. And again, I could do that in this view by saying active camera and take it one camera at a time. Oh, now here's that camera. I wanted that to be looking more at the door. And it's yes? You can't change the height offset. Once they're placed, they're sort of stuck with that. So what we're going to do is we have to sort of place new ones. Okay, turns out it's actually pretty easy to go ahead and do that. But yeah, you want to do that so badly. I want to do that so badly. So I was searching around for a way and finally found the definitive answer that says, no, you can't. Okay, so let's go ahead and play that camera path a little bit better, see if that improved things. Let me go back to frame 1. I'll try playing it. Oops, let me go back to the other view so I can actually see it. Cancel out of here. Okay, here we are. Still swinging a little far over there. Dwayne's hanging around looking at his BlackBerry before going into the meeting. Okay, come through the door. Come crashing through the door. Okay, someone asked last class, can we make those doors animate? Because you'd like to. You'd love to have them open up. But within Revit, which is kind of a cheapy rendering or animation engine, no, we don't have the ability to do that yet. Maybe next year, something like that. In Revit, you can move a camera around, but you can't actually get the objects to respond to your movement. Okay? There's some other programs, 3D Studio Max as well as Navisworks, where we can take our Revit models and add the animation there. So as you sort of escalate and you want to be better and better with your animations, you can actually set them up so that when you walk up to a door, it slides out of the way or swings open or does something in response to your being there. Okay, but for now, at least within Revit, no, we can't. That wasn't looking at a very good angle. We should probably keep on fixing that. So again, what I would do is I'd go to my keyframes. I was looking pretty good all through here. I was looking up the stairs. That was kind of fine. Up in here, I'm looking way up. Oh, I know why. It's because I was looking so high up at the stairs. So what I want to do is do a look down. So really, I'm more just kind of into the space of the lab benches. Let me back up to the previous keyframe. I can just play a subsection of it if I want to, just to sort of see what that effect is. You don't have to keep on replaying the entire thing. Okay. So you can adjust the path and kind of like make the path sort of be what you want it to be. But let's go ahead and kind of do something useful with that. Okay, edit the path. Oh, before I actually do the offsets, let me do one last thing. Let's talk about the speed of the path. Okay, and that is as follows. As you go through and you have this path, there's 300 frames that are perfectly evenly spaced. So in terms of how quickly you're moving through the model, okay, we take the total distance. It's 30 feet that I'm moving. It'll take 300 frames, and it'll basically say that, great, I am moving, what is it? A tenth of a foot for every frame, and it'll go through and calculate at that perfectly evenly. Okay, but you can fine-tune things if you want to, too. And the reason you'd like to do that is, often as you're going through and doing these walkthroughs, some areas are interesting, some aren't so interesting. As I'm panning around here and I'm looking at the computers, oh, I might want to pause and just kind of really take it all in. But when I'm just sort of walking down the hall, okay, this isn't so interesting. I might just want to speed through this. Oh, but look at this. And I'll slow down and linger here for just a second, and then I'll keep on going on. Okay, so if you would like to go through and have the ability to kind of just really control the speed, let me show you where that is. You're hanging around, you're looking at your walkthrough. So far, so good. We're going to go through and say, well, let me undo it so we can just sort of select it over again. If you're editing the walkthrough, we're in the middle of the walkthrough. Walkthroughs have instance properties. And amongst the many different instance properties that are available are render settings, if you happen to want to render your walkthrough, or walkthrough frames. And walkthrough frames is the one that gives you the ability to go through and control the total number of frames, the frames per second, and also the speed. So by default, it's 300 frames, 15 frames per second by default. That's giving us 20 seconds of video. Now, 15 seconds of video is actually, it's moving along pretty smoothly, stuff like that. But it's only 20 seconds of video, 15 frames, 20 seconds. I can slow that down a little bit, apply that. It'll give me 30 seconds instead. Okay, this is really, you're going to get a sense just as you run your animations whether they feel like they're going too fast or going too slow. Okay, you don't want to have, 3,000 frames because it'll be a lot of data to render. You can, it's just going to be a very big movie. But you can slow it 15 frames a second, it's moving. It's doing pretty good. 10 frames a second, okay, it's a little slower, it's a little jumpier, but it's still okay. When it starts getting down to 1 frame a second, that's like, and you'll sort of get a sense of really what feels right. 30 frames a second is like, whoa, we just kind of moved on through. So you got to sort of figure out what feels right, but 10 or 15 is usually pretty good, okay, in terms of how quick things are going. There is uniform speed, which is set to by default. If you'd like to start having some control, you can turn that off, and you see now you actually get this accelerator that'll let us control the speed between any of the key frames. So what it's done here is just based on the distance from the start to the end of the path, it said, okay, altogether we're going to pass through 30 seconds and 300 frames. It's gone through and really figured out how much footage we're moving with every second, so 2'4" per second. Okay? And if I'd like to slow it down or speed it up, if, for example, between 3 and 4, it's a boring hallway and I just don't care, I can accelerate it. And I'll actually just be moving much quicker between those two different points. Similarly, if I go through and I say, you know, between 5 and 6 is really pretty interesting, I can put in a value less than 1 and it'll slow it down. Okay, so this is after you got things going, you got a path mapped out, and you're looking at the right things. This is really very fine tuning. If you really want to sort of linger in some places and speed up in other places, you can adjust it. Okay, there's not an expectation that you're going to do this necessarily for your movie, okay, but again, I want you to know about it so that if you happen to hit a big dull spot and you just assume march them through that quickly and use the frames somewhere else where you get more value out of them, okay, you can adjust these speeds. Okay, again, it's going to keep the total time, and it's always just sort of related between the total number of frames and the frames per second. So you can add more frames if you want your movie to be twice as long. You can make it 600 frames, which will make a 60-second movie. Okay, but it's going to take longer to go ahead and produce that. Okay. Let's go back to 300 again. So I can go through and set those frames per second. But the one that everyone loves is the next one, and that's the whole idea of adjusting the camera offset. So let's kind of show you how you do that. Because this is where you get to have some fun, either walking upstairs or flying over the project and kind of coming down to the ground level, really whichever way you want to do it. It turns out it's pretty easy to do because all we're really going to do is, as we're placing cameras, set up an offset. Okay, so instead of being at 5'6", as we're moving, we have to sort of think about halfway up the stairs, how high would we be off the ground? 3/4 of the way up the stairs, how high would be off the ground? Okay, and let it go ahead and transition. For every camera or key point, you're going to go through and put in that offset. Okay, as you're doing this, it's often helpful to underlay another floor level that you're walking up to, just because you can't change the floor level halfway through defining the path. So underlaying it lets you see that when you get up to the second floor, you're actually walking through the hallway and not bumping into a wall up there. Okay, so let's show you what that looks like. So I got my one walkthrough, that's fine. Let me go back to my first floor plan. Oh, what do I want to do here? I'll just click off of that walkthrough because that's not the one I'm interested in. Let me go through and create a new walkthrough, but before I do, let me say View Properties, and in this view, I will turn on the underlay. Okay, I'm going to turn on the underlay of level 2, okay, just so I can actually see up there a little bit. As I come up to the top of the stairs, there actually is a little hallway right here. I go out to the balcony, or I come down the hallway into the owner's office. There's a little balcony rail right there. So I just want that little bit of information because that's going to help me to make sure that I don't go putting things out in space. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so here's my goal. I want to create like a walkthrough that's going to walk up those stairs up to the second floor and kind of look around. So how would I do that? I'll come to the 3D view, say walkthrough, and I will start placing cameras or keyframes. Okay, the first ones are going to be at 5'6". That's going to be sort of just walking on the first floor level. So maybe over here, and even when I'm over here, I'm kind of hanging around still at 5'6". Okay, this next location, I'm starting to get up the stairs. I actually want to give that a little bit of lift to indicate that I've sort of started climbing the stairs. So maybe that's at 8 feet. You're going to have to sort of figure out really for your model what's the appropriate level. And for the next one, oh, maybe I'm at 10 feet over right about in here. And then for the next one, maybe I'm at 12 feet, kind of over here. Then for the next one, oh, maybe I'm at 14 feet, sort of in this range. Now, at some point, you're going to get to the point where it makes sense, rather than measuring off of level 1, that you switch over and measure off of level 2. Okay, when I step up onto level 2, let me say for that next one, I'll just measure off the level 2 floor. And I'll want to be at 3 feet off the floor. Okay, and then for this final one here, I'll be at 5 foot off the floor. Okay, so I'm able to wrap around on myself. That part's looking good. Okay, so far so good. Just put the heights in at different offsets. Let me finish that walkthrough. I'll select it and we'll open it up. I can say edit it, then open the walkthrough. Let me go back to frame 1 and we'll take a look at what it looks like. Okay, we're down here on the first floor. We're going to go through every camera and just really adjust what it's looking at, because we always need to sort of say, for each of these different cameras, what are your targets? Its first guesses are usually okay, but not quite right. I'll say, let me do a look. And for you, I'm just going to be sort of looking at the stairs. I'll say next keyframe. It's kind of looking outside. I tend to look in towards the inner rail more than the outer rail, but it's, again, however you want to play that. Next keyframe. Again, I'm going to say maybe looking a little more towards the inner than the outer. Next keyframe. Getting a little low. It's like the ant climbing the stairs. Uh-oh, I'm way low there. I better look up or redo my frame or redo my walkthrough. I got really low. Okay, next frame. Let me see where I am. Am I in the floor? Oh, that just doesn't. That's just painful. Oh, what's that? Oh, there we are. No, we're not quite so bad off. Didn't do a very good job with that one. Let me go ahead and I'm going to redefine it, because that's not a very good example. I want to give you an example that works. Okay. Back to the drawing board in terms of calculating. We'll say, okay, it's over here. Let's say over here, because this is actually a pretty tall building. Let's say it's 8 right here. I'll say it's 10 right here. I'll say it's, let's say 13 right here. I'll say 16 right here. I'll say 19 right here. I'm just trying not to get into the floor. And I'll say that this one is 5 feet above the floor right here and right there. Okay, let's try that. Sorry for that bad example. Let's edit that walkthrough. I'll say open it. We'll go back to frame 1 and take a look. Okay, we're hanging. We're looking. Next keyframe. We're looking. Next keyframe. We're looking. Next keyframe. Better, a little better. Next keyframe. We're looking. We're at the top of the stairs. Next keyframe. We made it. We're up above the stairs. We'll look down the hall. And for the last keyframe, we'll do a big swing around. And we will appreciate this fantastic curtain wall and the beautiful trees outside. Okay, beautiful. Let's go back and we'll try playing that. Okay, so you can see that it's moving the camera. We had to place the offsets for the camera manually, but then we could go ahead and kind of keep on adjusting the look, so we can keep on adjusting the target to be what we want it. With a little bit of playing around, you could actually do very, very cool effects with this. Okay, let's see if we can go down that hallway just a little. Oh, but then we'll spin around and we'll look out the windows and we're looking at that fantastic image. Okay. So you can go through and adjust the path to be what you want, give it offsets. Okay. I will leave it to you to do the other side, which is to actually say that you want to do a flyover animation. For that, what you do is you'd start outside the building, you know, at 50, 60, 100 feet high. You'd move in closer, getting lower and lower, and eventually come crashing through the front door or something like that. Okay, in terms of your walkthroughs, the important thing is go through and preview them. Test it before you save it. So select the walkthrough, do this thing where you either step through a frame at a time or click the play button and just go. For example, over in this walkthrough, we got about halfway up there, and I forget what was happening there. I wasn't quite happy with what it was looking at one point. Okay, you can go through and just go for next keyframe or next keyframe, and then start looking at, previous frames, next frame if you want to do sort of in the little itty-bitty moves, or next keyframe. When you're in here looking at it and you're editing it, if it's not quite looking at what you want, go ahead and adjust the look. Yeah, just keep on tweaking preview, get to that next frame, keep on tweaking it to get just exactly what you want. For the most part, you're good on moving the targets. It's just the offsets for the camera that you have to sort of worry about if you don't get those right the first time. Okay. Click the play button when you're ready to go through and take a look at the whole thing. And finally, towards the end of this whole process, you want to export this thing. So how do you do that? It's actually just under the application menu. There's export images and animations. Okay, this is going to create a big movie. So in terms of saving this movie, rather than putting it on the coursework drive, which is limited to 40 megabytes, the TAs are going to send out a message about a specific space on the L drive where you can upload your movie. Okay, because it's just going to be too big to fit on coursework. Okay, you're going to go through and choose how you would like it rendered. Do you want it to be a wireframe, a hidden line, or a shading view? Or do you actually want to go through and do a rendering? And let's kind of show you what this looks like in terms of your choices. So I got my movie. I say I want to export that. Let me export a walkthrough. It gives us the choice here. You can say all the frames, or you can just say a subsection of the frames. As a starting point, it may be wise to go through and render the first 10 or 15 frames as opposed to all 13 or all 300, just to make sure that they're looking good. Okay, you could also do the frames per second. I could slow it down here if I want to and make it a 20-second movie or 30-second movie. Hidden line view is just sort of the black and white, taking out the lines that we've hidden. Shading and shaded with edges tend to be the ones that I use. They have sort of interesting effects. Let me show you shaded with edges first. I'll leave that to be 100% of the size. That's fine. I'll say this is shaded with edges. Say OK. I'll leave it uncompressed because it actually looks a lot better that way. It's actually better to sort of just reduce the size of the movie as opposed to sort of like going through and doing the compression. Shaded with edges has this effect. You have all the shaded surfaces. They'll show you the color of your materials, okay, but it also has those little black lines around the edge. Okay, and as you do this, shaded with edges I think looks very good for rendered views, but I think it's a little bit funny on the movies just because you really sort of see those like lines that aren't quite, resolving right nicely, so they look a little bit funny. Okay, let me go ahead and run it the other way. We'll do that same movie. Let me export it. Actually, I can just preview it just the same. It'll sort of work. Here it is. I'll say edit it. I can say shading instead, and I'll say play it. Edit. Go back to the beginning. Shading sometimes looks a little bit better because you sort of have the ambiguous corners or the ambiguous sides as opposed to actually having all the black lines. So your eye sort of fills in a lot of the information or fills in a lot of the gaps and sort of smooths things out a little bit. But shading or shaded with edges, those are both perfectly fine options for what you're doing. For your assignment, shade with edges, leave it that way. 30 seconds. Don't have to show the entire house, some small path through the house. Okay, shade with edges, get on through. Okay, in terms of whatever it is that you choose to show us. Because really you're just showing us that you can go through and manipulate a camera. Choose your path carefully. If it's in your path, you probably want to make sure it's rendered nicely and has good materials and there aren't holes in the cabinets and whatever's going on there. So you can choose a path carefully to always go past things that look good, as opposed to things that don't look so. It's kind of like being an art director or something like that. If it's out of the camera frame, no one cares about it. You only care about what's actually sort of in there. So you go through and choose your path carefully. Okay, if you do want to go through and render, what I will recommend is as follows. Okay, go ahead, set up your settings. You can choose rendering. Okay, go ahead and bring this smaller. This is going to be an awful lot of data, so make that like 480 or something like that. Just bring much smaller in terms of what's actually going on. Okay, then leave it be and allow that it's going to run for 6 hours or something like that. It'll just take a long time. You can just really figure out how much time it takes to render a single frame, and then it's going to multiply that by 300. Or in this case, I'll try this again as we're sort of just working along in here. Let me say I'm just going to go up from frame 1 to 40 or something like that, just see if we can get a little bit of something. And I'll say it's 5 frames per second. Okay, let's let that run. Okay, so if you're going to render, please, 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 do not set yourself up in here on one of these machines and start it rendering for the next 24 hours and put a sign over the machine saying, please leave this alone, because people won't leave it alone. As soon as the MATLAB class needs to come in and use the machines, they'll go ahead and like stop your rendering. So if you want to render, do that at home, do it on some other machine that you have access to that's sort of more private. But that's not at all the expectation. So don't feel like you have to go rendering just because you want to try every last thing or something like that. For what you're doing on this one, just going ahead and getting a nice shaded view, moving the camera around is going to be perfectly fine. Okay, so we'll stop here. We're going to just take the rest of the class to just work with people individually. If you have your project here and you're having some troubles, raise your hand. We'll try to come around and answer questions. But what would be really great is if you can go ahead and just try and get these like 3 things, the interior, the exterior, and the walkthrough just sort of banged out, get them out of the way. On Thursday, we can start with a clean slate as we start moving into the next thing. So although the deadline is until Friday, I bet you with a little work, you can get this thing actually done today. Because walkthrough isn't all that hard. It's just sort of manipulating the camera around and making it happen. Okay? So let us break for now. Again, we're going to hang around until the next class. So if you want to stick around and keep on working, we'll be here to answer questions.